Yo, what's going on everybody, and welcome to another episode of Cookie Cutters. In this episode, we are not going to be sitting in front of this damn bench just talking away. We are going to be cutting, grinding, welding, wrenching, and installing. But before any of that happens, intro please.
Showtime, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to get the nitty from the gritty right about now. We're going to bring on the fat cat that knows where it's at. He's going to suck it to your long, deep, wide consecutive. Bring him on with a big round of applause.
And welcome back. So what is on the menu for today? Well, we're going to be deleting the mechanical water pump, we're going to be deleting the thermostat housing, and we're going to be installing the Whiteline S13 front adjustable sway bar. So with that being said, let's get to it. So taking a look behind the radiator, you can see that the radiator is very close to touching the water pump, and that's without a pulley. Since the mechanical pump is being replaced with a block-off plate, what will be used instead of a water pump? Well, I ended up buying a Davies Craig electric water pump. There are many advantages of running an electric water pump. Aside from it being able to be remote mounted, it frees up space in front of the engine to make more room for the V-mount setup. But most importantly, it frees up horsepower that would otherwise be lost to spinning a mechanical pump. Now on the other side, we can see here that the intercooler is resting on top of the thermostat housing. This is a problem because the intercooler needs to be sitting a little lower. Good thing is that with the pump comes a digital controller that acts as a thermostat, which is why this housing is being removed. As you guys can see, there are AN fittings coming off of the intake manifold as well as the thermostat housing. Because this is a custom setup and the electric water pump is already tapped for AN fittings, I've started to convert the cooling system to 20 AN. In a future video, I will be showing you guys how I did this and what's needed to accomplish a similar setup for yourself. So in order to make the block-off plate for the water pump, we are going to be modifying an old rusted KA water pump that came off of a different engine. In order for this to work, we will first need to press out the impeller and bearing housing. As you guys can see here, the pulley flange has already been pressed off. That thing was ridiculously hard to press off even after I took my propane torch to it, but it's all gutted now. Now that we have the housing all by itself, the next thing to do would be to cut the housing down as flush as possible with the bandsaw. Next, we'll use an angle grinder to both remove the casting that the bandsaw wasn't able to cut off, as well as to prepare the surface for welding. All that's left to do now is to weld the hole shut. I'll keep welding until the entire hole is filled in. Now that it's done, this is what it looks like compared to a stock water pump. And here we have it. The block-off plate is bolted up, and as you guys can see, there's a lot more room for activities. Next, we'll make the block-off plate for the thermostat housing. This one we're going to be making out of a scrap piece of 1/8 inch thick aluminum sheet that I had lying around. The reason for that is because the thermostat housing flange has very little material where if I even tried to weld it shut, it would just warp like crazy. The first step would be to place the housing on the piece of aluminum and scribe out its outline. Next, we'll drill out the 3 mounting holes. Once those are done, back to the bandsaw we go. With the block-off plate cut out, I'll sand off all the rough edges and shape it a bit just to make it more aesthetically pleasing. So there we have it. Both block-off plates are done and mounted, and now it's sway bar time. So before we get into the Swaybar install, I just want to make it clear that there are a few different combinations of parts that when used together will allow you to run S13 front suspension on an S12. Depending on the combination that you use will determine if you'll be able to run an S13 Swaybar or not. I won't get into specifics about which parts could be used, but I will link the forum post that helped me figure this out in the description. The parts I'm using are Part Shop Max S13 competition coilovers, stock S13 knuckles, Part Shop Max Pro front lower control arm and tension rod combo, and finally the S14 tension rod brackets that I have converted into a power brace. So if you have an S12, many people on the forums will tell you that an S13 Swaybar is too wide to mount into an S12. I know this because when I was looking into this myself, all I ever found was people just saying to run the ADCO Swaybar. Now with my setup, I feel like there are a few reasons why I'm able to install this bar. To start, the Part Shop Max front lower control arm has two mounting holes for the Swaybar that are angled upwards, whereas the stock S13 front lower control arm is parallel to the ground. Second reason is the Whiteline end links are a ball joint style that allow for the bar to be slightly wider. So this isn't going to be a full install video as I haven't had stock S12 front suspension for the longest time. So I wouldn't be able to show you how to remove and replace all of the stock S12 stuff. But the install is pretty straightforward and it's the same as if you were to be installing an S13 Swaybar into an S13. To begin, you pass the Swaybar above the tension rods to get it close to its final install location. Now, because these are S14 tension rod brackets, one of the tension rod bracket bolts needs to be removed in order for the Swaybar bracket and bushing to be installed. Once the bolt is removed, place the bushing over the Swaybar and add the bracket. If you're doing this on flat ground like I am, it'll take some finagling to position the bracket to get the bolt started. As I've mentioned, this is an S14 tension rod bracket, so there will be a gap on one side of the bracket. Now the cool thing is that Energy Suspension provides you with a spacer and longer bolt for the S14 tension rod bracket. Before tightening all the nuts and bolts down on this side, we'll move on to the passenger side and do the exact same thing. Bushing, bracket, longer bolt with spacer, and finally the nylock nut. Now that both driver and passenger side brackets are on, we'll leave everything loose so we have some wiggle room to install the adjustable end links. So on the front lower control arm, the holes are drilled out bigger than the bolt diameter of the end link, which will cause it to not sit properly when tightened down. So we're going to use the washers that were supplied with the Whiteline Swaybar. The washers are machined to fit, so there's very little play with the bolt. Then we screw on the supplied nut and leave it loose just like the bushing brackets. Next we put the top part of the end link into the Swaybar. Then thread on the supplied lock nut and once again leave it loose. Now we thread the lower portion of the end link into the upper portion to join them. We'll repeat the process on the passenger side, and we are now ready to set the height of the end link. So as you can see, everything is snugged up, nothing's tightened 100% yet. We're going to do our final height setting of the links, and then we'll do a round of tightening and then we'll be done. Here I'm using my super accurate Harbor Freight caliper to make sure that both driver and passenger side end links are set to the same distance. Once the end link height is set, we'll snug up the locking nut by hand and tighten them up with wrenches. We'll then repeat the same thing on the passenger side. Once the end links are nice and tight, then I'll go over each nut and bolt and tighten them down to make sure that nothing is left loose. So now that the car is back on flat ground, we can see that Yeah, it's a bit high, but I mean, this stuff was never meant to go into an S12. So yeah, S13 adjustable sway bar, S13 adjustable sway bar links, Part Shop Max adjustable front lower control arms with the tension rod, S14 tension rod brackets, and yeah, it all managed to work. And we've reached the end of the video. If you guys enjoyed it, leave a thumbs up. If you guys got any questions, comments, concerns, then leave them down below. If you guys have any more questions regarding the sway bar or where the S12 sits now, I'll link the Instagram in the description. But yeah, if you guys are curious to see what the future holds for this S12, then subscribe. But yeah, this is the end of the video. I shall see you guys in the next one. Peace.